Okay, good. Ibaro, please proceed. Ibaro, please proceed. Mm.
Good evening, and I welcome you to another edition program. All converse thoughts, share ideas, thoughts, and topics. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you to the edition of the program through my sound converted thoughts and ideas on topical affecting the world. On this week's special, we will be discussing women's rights and modern society following the International Women's Celebration on 8th of March. Challenge. but to what claim? You know, to battle to help forge a gender equal world and celebrate women's achievements. Now that the world change, how do we balance right of a woman in modern day society? We have Akiyode-Afolabi. She is a Nigerian lawyer and civil rights activist. She is the founding director of Women Advocate Research and Documentation Center, Ward C, a non-governmental and health advocacy organization founded in 2002, company on addressing issues relating to excellence and policy cases. Afolabi is an executive member of West Africa and the Nigerian Women's Trust. She is a person of the Decision Monitoring Group, CG, a collective of 400 civil society organizations, a member of Bring Back Our Girl movement, and she's the campaign for safe and secure schools in Northeast Nigeria. She also led the Gender and Constitution Reform Network, founded in 2003. Like international humanity at the University of Lagos. So joining us is Ms. Rosemary Iyade Usman. Mrs. Usman is a graduate of International and Law from the UK's University. She's the CEO of 3B's Entertainment, a philanthropist, producer, mentor, and worship artist. She is also a care manager in the health sector. Rosemary grew up learning parenting early, even before having children owned. She believes the onus rests on parents to see their children's posterity through training and guidance. With this, let the show begin. Over to the studio with our moderator, Akin.
Good evening, ladies. Thank you for joining us this evening. To our viewers on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, thank you for being there this evening as usual. And to our guests, thank you for being here. Dr. Abiola, thank you for being here. Rosemary, thank you for being here. Dr. Abiola, let me start with you. One of the major challenges that some may argue with modern society is this propensity for us, particularly in maybe the more liberal settings, for us to carve out terms that make people wonder what exactly is it you're talking about. And today we're talking about women's rights. Doctor, help to give some context to what exactly it means.
Women's rights is in 1993 at Vienna conference. One of the things that came out from that international conference, where all human rights practitioners and head of government were, was to say that women's right is human rights. The word women's rights came as a result of historical injustices that women, have suffered. And they realized that when the body of rights was being presented, some very specific issues that has to do with women's rights, women's life, bodily integrity, and a whole lot of other things that are particular and specific to women were not included in those issues. So women then began to canvass for the expansion of the language of rights. And that's why how we came about speaking in specific terms about women's rights. So which is human right, but it's a way of emphasizing that we're talking about the rights of women in particular, which is part of the body of rights.
One thing, Doctor, that has personally for me has created a bit of an interesting internal debate is at what point do we say we are going beyond the normal levels of conversations and we are forgetting this human rights aspect of things? Because I remember, I think it was in the US, the 1964 Human Rights Act, that discrimination against women was forgotten. And other women's groups, advocacy groups, then came up and put pressure on the president at the time. And they said, okay, yeah, fine, we realize we missed this out. And then they brought that in. Even in the UK, it's the same thing that happened when we were fighting for the rights of women to vote. Um, how do we overcome that sort of issue where these issues around women's rights are not things that are at the forefront of people's minds and we forget and we get into trouble for forgetting?
Well, we're in a society that's very patriarchal by nature, and women are active participants in the society. But unfortunately, the society seems not to recognize that because society is biased, it's patriarchal. It's not seeing women in the light of development and growth that women, contribute, to the society, but rather, looking at them as in some places as properties, looking at women in some places as competitors, looking at women in some places as second class citizens. A lot of people describe women as the weaker sex, and all that. So, with that, in the society, it makes it very difficult for. We find out that most nation states, they don't also recognize the importance of women, so they don't prioritize women, and so we then see a lot of things, happening in the society that give the impression that there's a set of people that are not recognized in society, and it's even in the most democratic world, anywhere around the world, you will still see that that is still there. So no matter who you are, even if you're a professor, if you are learned, the bias and the stereotype and the stigma, that have been going around how women are perceived still, affect, your identity as a person. And so it's something that, so what do we then need to do is want to put our consciousness, from that so-called conversation about women as weaker sex. There's nothing biologically that makes women weaker in any way. So the question of is our socialization that defines, women as weaker sex that puts women behind. And you see that in laws and other things that we made, we see that that is also reflected in the laws. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Doctor. Rosemary, let me come to you. You are releasing a book very, very soon. Congratulations on that. But I read your manuscript, and you have some interesting thoughts about parenting in the past, the interpretation of religious text in the context of women's rights, and some of these points. But before I go into questions on that, you also do quite a lot of work with teenagers, with parents. What are they saying to you when it comes to women's rights for the teenagers and parents themselves? What is keeping them awake at night?
Uh, Thank you very much for providing this platform to address this salient but cancerous issue in this modern day society. From my experience, the concern for mothers and teenagers against gender bias in our time is most teenagers are haunted by the male counterparts. A lot of times they make comments and act for sexism, and dealing with teenagers most of the times when I deal with them, and for every one teenager you deal with, everything they say about a male counterpart is about sexism, sexist. Yeah, that was yesterday. I was dealing with a teenager, and same exact issue. I was like, oh my god, this is it's like a lot of times people don't. It's an issue that a lot of times a lot of teenagers actually keep up with these days. Having said that, in the same way, most women live in fear of the past, which is haunting them today. But I believe with continuous education, as we're doing right now, for women, teenagers will help this narrative. grow their confidence and help them to build the quality life that they are meant to live. Yes, there's a lot of concern about women's rights in this day, but as Dr. Abiola has mentioned, there's still a lot more to be done to reduce or eliminate this fear amongst women and teenagers.
Thank you for that. One thing I want to call out regarding parenting, uh, I noticed something you said in terms of what we could call the home training. What are parents teaching their children at home when it comes to all these issues? That means that when they leave, their mind is already geared to having the right self image, how they should be recognized outside there. What were some of the things that you saw?
Okay. Growing up, we've always been meant to believe that um, society has always viewed women as a caretaker of the home, and now raising children for them is for a child to either be good in the kitchen, well, especially female, well dressed, well. They don't see beyond that, and so that was the passion, especially for my book, to see that women are much more beyond kitchen. Women are much more beyond um, um, inside. Women are much more, so much about that raising children. And now, one of the methodology for this book is to make sure that no one is 1 minute, please. Yeah. So it's to make sure that no one out there is being pushed to do what they don't want to do. Growing up, most parents will push you to do what you don't want to do. Most parents will push you out there. Most parents will want you to do um, a lot of things that people don't want to do, a lot of things that teens don't want to do. But from this book, it will help you to realize that gender equality is.
We can hear you. Go ahead. Oh, I think we lost her there. Dr. Abiola, in terms of
Yes.
what Rosemary is saying there, do you recognize this trend in the home front from some of the women that you deal with? Do you recognize this challenge there?
Well, one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is the socialization process. And it's a very difficult thing to break because that's what your value system is based upon. So parenting then becomes a very difficult thing because you want to do what your parents did to you. But the society is quite digitalized, it's different. So parenting is actually a different ballgame from what it was about some years back. And it becomes also important for parents, to be able to understand that they need to believe in the me in their children and also help them, just guide them, to grow up with confidence, to be able to overcome challenges, to make mistakes, then to fall back, and then keep pushing on. So it's important for our parents to give that courage, to children. When we're growing up, oftentimes you rarely find parents who think that, it also depends on the culture, your background, where you're from. A child is not supposed to speak when the elders are talking, even when they are making sense. Even if you have something to say, you're supposed to keep quiet. When the elders are there, and all of that. So there were a lot of these empowering processes, at that point in time, that could bring a confident child, down, make the child to have low self-esteem, and we call this culture, respect, and all of that. So I think that moving forward to this modern day, it becomes very important, for us to reflect and reassess, what parenting means, so that we're also able to meet up with the drive that the young people of today have, so that we can positively, direct that drive in a way that they can be useful to themselves, and also they can also be useful to society.
There's a question here that I want to put to you before we go to the virtual studio audience, and we'll get Rosemary back in a second. But in the media, we started to see quite a lot of narrative around gender-based violence, around women's rights, women equality, and things like that. But I want to read something to you from the Irish press today. Came out earlier today, just to see what your view is on this. It says there will be no equality between men and women until gender-based violence is tackled. And one of the points raised here is that of 180 individuals, 66 organizations, uh, the outcome is that it's pervasive, it's prevalent, and it's on a continuum. Doctor, I always thought that gender-based violence um, was not necessarily what would drive gender inequality. Do you agree with this statement?
Well, gender-based violence is a bane of inequality, gender inequality. So I quite agree with the person. If gender-based violence is disempowering. It reduces the ability of I won't use the word victim, the survivor, the ability of the survivor, to be able to gain the kind of self-recognition that they're supposed to have as a human being. I deal with a whole lot of people, that have been affected, by gender-based violence. And I want to say confidently that at least a third of every woman have had one form of gender-based violence or the other, growing up. So I am not in any way different from the women that we are talking about in that regard. So the data is not talking in the abstract. The data is talking about us, as women, as you grow up, attempts of rape, as you grow up, you are abused sexually, there's sexual harassment, there's catcalling. So, rarely do we find any woman who grew up without one form of gender-based violence or the other. And that in itself, is according to the CEDAW committee, is discrimination. So it's inequality in the society that drive gender-based violence. The issue of power over. Somebody thinks that he has power over you. A person who comes into a room, sees an 80-year-old woman at the age, and maybe the last case I handled, the boy himself was just 22. So it's about inequality. It's about the fact you think that the other person is powerless. So it doesn't matter how old the person is. So from your own point of view, you think the person is powerless, and you are ready to abuse that person. So inequality, it's one of the driving factors. It's one of the pull and push factor, for gender-based violence. And until when we address the inequality, I quite agree with that person that we will not be able, to address gender-based violence. So they are linked together because inequality drives a lot of things. What happens in the home, what happens in the community, what happens, at the level of the society, and that's why you see a government who does not think it's important to have a shelter, to respond to people that are abused or for battered women. You will see that in most countries, particularly in Africa, that we're just getting to the culture of having like shelter, to support. So it's about inequality. It's about not seeing the need of the other person, not investing, in the life of the other person. And so I agree with the statement that we cannot address gender inequality if we don't address gender-based violence, because it's one of the things that drives inequality in the society.
All right, let's go to someone. I think we've got some audio from Khadija Gumbi in the virtual studio. Khadija, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. And it's a very interesting topic, women's rights in modern society. I have been looking forward to joining you, and I want to congratulate every woman.
Go ahead.
We're trying to challenge anyone that tries to discriminate a woman, to challenge anyone that tries to continue to make the woman vulnerable, to challenge every person that tries to use the weakness of a woman to discriminate her. Now, I am very happy and I welcome you all to this platform.
Do you have a question you want to put to our panelists?
Yes, my question here is, a woman is always making impact in the society. The woman, we always see her as a weak person. We see her as vulnerable. But if you look at actions made by women in modern day society, you'll be surprised to actually see her with that image. Do you think that this comes from the mindset, or it actually comes from the masculinity of the society that we have that gives us that version of being weak or being vulnerable, and we continue to accept it as it is? Or what do you think about that?
Dr. Abiola, do you want to take that first?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, I think I agree with you that there's a very toxic masculinity, which gives the impression that women are the weaker sex, and which also affects, women from being able to participate actively, in the society, and which is a major, challenge, because you then see that happens at every level of a woman's life. And so if you are not strong-willed, and of course, because there's also the community acquiescence, around it. People are afraid of a whole lot of things. People are afraid of stigmatization, and what have you. And this as a way of affecting, the growth of women. So generally, people then will feel that because you cannot confront it, you cannot confront the situation, then that means that you're weak, as a woman. But by and large, if you look at the hand that actually built the society, they are the unseen answer. They're the women. The, Look at the last COVID-19 pandemic in places where women, headed the countries that women, they had less people dying, and they had like quick intervention, and even apart from that, if you look at history, during of the society, women have played very significant role, either as warrior, either as So the whole idea of women, the weaker sex, is actually not a tenable. It's from the patriarchal world. It's part of the old history from which came as a result of patriarchy and trying to put women behind in the society, and people grow up with that. Women grow up with that, and that's why you see some women say, "Oh, women are their worst enemies," because they want the other woman to believe so. So these are some of the way with which the society makes it very complicated for women to exist, to see themselves as a problem, to see themselves as the fault. But women, if we look at what research is showing, and evidently what we see on a daily basis, women are very strong people. They manage the home, they manage the society. If you give a woman an opportunity, you will see how that woman will turn around, the entire opportunity. So, and I think that we need to begin to give a much more positive image of women. The media is also not helping in terms of the kind of thing that they say about women in the media. So So we need to do a general value reorientation and change the way people, think before we can be able to address issues like
Rosemary, what's your take on that point?
Yes. We need to give the platform. I'm going to speak on parental parts where our children are growing up as well. We need to give them that platform on how they can become confident and don't have that same aim that women are less privileged to men. And then we need to treat them, we need to teach them about the truths and the means about men as well. A lot of times they've often have this idea that men are stronger than women, just because of the home perspective or physical strength. So they feel like men are stronger than women, obviously. But as we grow on, as we have more of help from education, more of help from the government, I think we need to teach our children self-worth, and then about teach our children self-value to be able to grow up and then be that woman that we want them to be, and then they don't focus on the issue we're dealing with at the moment.
Thank you for that. Dr. Abiola, let me come back to you on this point here. There's another problem I see here, and not just on the women's rights issue, but even when you broaden the context of it to go to race. Is this issue a women's issue to solve?
Well, it's not. It's not. It's an issue that we all need to solve together. Because the truth of the matter is that when you alienate 50% of the population, it's not in any way justifiable. It's not smart economics, because in a way it affects the growth and development of the society. Let me give you an instance. In the northern part of Nigeria, in Northeast in particular, where we have about 6 states, 20% of women in the Northeast are literate. By implication, meaning that about 80% are illiterate. So then if you look at that kind of statistic, in that kind of society, and if we look at in terms of poverty in the country, there's a huge population of poor people, particularly in the northeastern part of Nigeria. Now, the implication of that is that you have alienated 50% of your economy. Those who can contribute actively, with their brain, who can contribute, the intelligence, to develop your economy. So what you have done is to alienate, that group of people. There's no country that continue to alienate majority or disempower majority of its people that can really, survive. So, but, having said that, so the question is, can we solve it just with women? Can we solve women's problem with women? Which is the question you're asking. But I would say no. Yes, women need to work to hold government accountable, to lead the struggle for the emancipation of women, but we also need the men and boys. One, we need to reorientate men and boys to change their attitude and what they see, or say about women, or their views about women, which are not correct, and change it to a positive way of perceiving women. We need to engage men, we need to engage boys, we need to engage men also because majority of the men are traditional, they're the gatekeepers, they're traditional rulers, they are the one in the community as community leaders. So we need to engage all these key influencers and stakeholders, to be able to address the problem of women. So it is not a problem that can be solved by women alone. It's a societal problem, and it must be addressed as a developmental problem. Because also a developmental problem is a problem that has to do with growth, is a problem that has to do with economy, So we need to address it from a very holistic points of view. So, and we need to do that with everybody on board. It's a collective responsibility, So that's the way I see it.
I want to move this conversation in a particular way before I bring in the next person from the virtual studio. And this is the notion that the rise of a woman means the devaluing of a man. And there has been some research that suggests that the more, and I don't necessarily subscribe to this, I'm just putting the research out there to get a response from you. But the fact that the more you see the rise of women, the rise of feminism, and all this type of things, it leads to a breakdown in the home. What are your views on that, Doctor? And then I'll come to you, Rosemary, to hear you.
Well, that's a very funny analysis. I disagree, entirely with that. Rather, I think that, and it's not a competition. It's not like people are saying, let's shoot down patriarchy, let's bring up matriarchy. The reason why the society is the way it is because um, there seems to be some oppression that has led to injustices on the side of a particular gender, against the other one. And you don't solve that problem by creating, more problem, for the world. So I do not believe that. So I think that ordinarily the rights of women should also lead uh, 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 to the increase in development in the society, and not necessarily lead to the fall of men. It's not. It's not in any way. It's about. So, and that's why I think there must be mutual understanding of what gender equality means. It's about equal opportunities. It's about everybody, having his own contribution and share, in the society. So how could that then turn around to, bring out the other person? So I think that it's part of that, because we get to see a lot of that, especially for some of us who work in this field. You enter into a room and you're supposed to train the men, and someone is looking at you and thinking that, these women, what do they want to tell us now? They want to take our position from us. So it becomes very important to understand that the whole conversation about gender equality is not to bring out down one gender, for the other. There must be a mutual understanding and also knowledge that it is important for everyone in the society to be able to have a say. Is a human right, that is human right for all of us, to have a right to participate equally in a society that belongs to us. If you have people who are in the parliament, they are all men, and we see that a lot, and that's why part of the problem why we have problems with development. They probably will not be able to think, the way the women will be able to think, and also bring their own contribution on the table. So what then you see is that a particular group of people will not be heard. So the whole idea is not to bring competition between men and women, but rather to look at it from a developmental point of view. So look at it from the fact that we're a people, and collectively we can all address the problem of the world. So I would disagree with the fact that the rise of women is going to mean the downfall of men. I find that quite awkward, and I really disagree with it.
Yes, it's actually quite an interesting point because there is quite a lot of research that people are putting out, considering both sides of the debate, of course. Um, so just to point that out, Rosemary, let me come to you in terms of this point that looks at a lot of the training, a lot of the initiatives we get when it comes to this area of gender equality or this area of women's rights are maybe to a degree focused on one area, and that's the area where we're looking at the women, the training for the women. How about the training for the men? You talked about something where you referred to it as the science of masculinity. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. The science of masculinity is a kind of process for educating young, from my perspective or from parenting perspective, is to educate young girls about the behavior. There's a lot of maths, and then there's a lot of truth that need to be addressed about men, and we need to magnify and appreciate to be able to differentiate the reality. And that is for the maids. Men are obviously emotionally withdrawn. That's for the mains. Men, I mentioned this previously, men are stronger than women physically. Men are only moved when they want to be. Men do not do, or most times people think that men, the only thing they think is sex and nothing else. But for the truth that we need to educate on, or we need to see that it's actually an equal right, it's actually not a competition, or it's actually not, the truth is men sometimes need affection of faith as well. Men gives, this is the training that we need to put up to be able to not see it like in one perspective. So we need to see it from the other side as well. A man does not interpret submissions or interpret affections easily. He does not appreciate or watch things that women think or want. That's for the truth. And one more thing for the maids, both the man and the women are to work as support each other. Both women are to sideline. Both women and the man are to know that the emotions are of the same. As Doctor has mentioned, the society needs to see that women are not less equal, or submission is not devalued by men.
Thank you for that, Rosemary. That's a really good to hear those points. Dr. Abiola, I want to come back to you with a point that I think has gripped the world in the last few weeks. And that's when we start to look at some of the things, the allegations that have been made about the royal family, and the context in which we would say a woman has been treated in the context of living within this royal family. So the question I want to put to you is this: when women find themselves in that kind of situation, what is the right response?
Well, it's just to be who you are and be consistent about the reason behind the decisions that you've made. As I said, the society is very patriarchal, and patriarchy is also it's about sexism. It's about sexist language and all of that. Patriarchy is about racism. Patriarchy is about it's also has a language of class, and what have you. So what have you? So what when women find themselves in that situation, it's for you to be consistent and be yourself and stand by your position, because at times such position is done to shift an age-long behavior that needs to be changed. And I think that's what is happening with what we are seeing in the story that has been generating in the last 2 weeks. Yeah, I think there's a time to begin to shift, the culture, that in a way pushes the fact that it's not racist, but in the real sense, it is obvious that it's very racist.
Let me put a question to you here, Doctor. And this is where we start to look at what are some of the provisions that we have in law to address some of these issues. Because then people say, Well, there are laws, and these laws should guide how we address some of these issues anyway. What's your take on that?
Well, there are laws, but there are also laws with very laws that are very um, male centric, that are also not, put into consideration the needs of everyone. The law itself is it's a tool that has also disempowered quite, a lot of women. So there's always a negotiation and renegotiation of laws, across the country, across the world. We have in several countries laws that are put into question women's citizenship, that has supported citizenship to be seen, from the male perspective, that have been challenged at different places. We have laws in some countries, that have some form of religious bias. For example, in a poor country like Nigeria, we still have in the penal code a law which says that a man can beat his wife insofar as it does not cause grievous harm. So we have laws in country that supports early marriage. We have laws in some countries that support female genital mutilation, or that contest the right to a woman's bodily integrity. While we also have other laws, that can counteract some of those laws. But at times, at that point, you need someone to make that decision. It could be a judge, so it depends on the discretion of the judge who's going to make the final decision about judge, how that law is supposed to be perceived, So, and that's why there is a lot of conversation across the world about addressing and auditing the laws, and also reviewing the laws in a manner that the laws will be able to promote women's human rights. It's been a very long journey for women. The first human rights instrument is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The second was in 1966, the ICCPR, International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and all of that. But at a point in time, women realized, even with the United Nations, that there seems to be exclusion, in the law, and that was what led them to led the women to get in 1981 the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So my point is that yes, there are laws, but it depends on the way we perceive the laws. Yes, the laws can be useful to address discrimination. At the same time, the laws that we have themselves need to be audited, to be able to make them to support and promote gender equality. So that's the point.
It's an interesting one you make there in terms of the UN there, because there is a body within the UN, the UN Women Group, that addresses specifically women issues, and I know they've been doing quite some work in some states in Nigeria. What do you see as the role of such bodies in driving this narrative within countries, particularly in Africa?
Yeah, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Single Committee, is a body that the UN has established to be able to monitor implementation of women's human rights across the world. And of course, every country is expected to give some what we call periodic reports every 4 years, to this committee, and that committee makes recommendation or resolution on different countries. Yeah, some of the recommendations they have made were in most African countries and elsewhere. We have used those decisions to name and shame the government, to hold the government accountable, to press for change for women, to ensure that things change, in those countries. In Nigeria, for example, we have used the decision and recommendation of that committee to demand for accountability, on women's human rights. As of today, we have about 22 states out of the 36 states in Nigeria, that have been able to pass the law called Violence Against Person Prohibition Law, which is violence against women, women prohibition law in the real sense. And this is also part of the contribution of a committee from the UN, that as that has supported us from being holding government accountable, and this is everywhere. So it's not only Nigeria. In Liberia, they have laws reflecting addressing issue of sexual violence. In Syria alone, they have 3 gender laws which they have passed in recent times. I can mention as many as possible. There's a protocol in the Southern Africa also that is a law that is addressing women's human rights. But my point is that yes, we have these bodies of laws there, but implementation is very poor. There are things that you need to put in place to make laws work. The judiciary must also first understand what gender equality means to be able to, make the right decision. When some of these issues, come before them.
Doctor, something you said there that I want to pull on. Somebody may listen to this and say, well, the law is the law. And I know that sometimes we may look at these things and take the slightly from the layman's perspective anyway. They are looking at the situation and they're saying, well, the law is the law. Yes, we understand that there may be corruption. Yes, we understand that there may be all these issues that impact how the law gets implemented. But help us understand this. How difficult exactly is it to take some of these cases and actually win them? Because that's what the law says.
Yeah, there are, and don't get me wrong. Yes, I am not saying that the laws have not been useful, but I'm saying that yes, there are also other things in terms of implementing the law. We've taken up cases, for example, sexual harassment case in Nigerian University, which is something that has been buried for a long time in the culture of silence, and we had walked through the law, and the professor, was jailed, for that. So that's a success story. So, and we have taken several other cases like that, where rapists in Akafa, that's very, in a place like Nigeria now, in Lagos, once you are accused of rape and they look at the evidence and they see that you are likely a threat to the society, to wait for the DPP advice before they release you, to the society. So, so the laws are working, but the laws need to work more for women. There are a whole lot of other reasons why the law has not been working. The police is there, when somebody is raped, you rush to the police, and the police is there. So there's a need for a general reorientation of those who are handling the justice system. There are several issues affecting access to justice for women. So beyond the law, we need to activate the law. So the processes of activating the law becomes very difficult for the poor woman who cannot afford a big-time lawyer, for the poor woman who does not even know where to go and what to do. So the law might be there and people don't have access to it. So so this and these are work of the state. These are work that the civil society needs to do. These are work that people need to do to be able to have a society that respects the rights of women. So the laws, yes, they are good, but there are also steps towards implementing. So what we normally see in Africa is that yes, even where you have the law, implementation of the law or enforcement of the law is poor, and the implementation of it is also very poor.
There's a point I want to put to you here, and this is, how do you balance the impact of culture, the law, and women's rights? Because sometimes it's so difficult to pull apart culture, what we call culture, from women's rights and from what the law says. I know that there's some states, particularly in Nigeria, where they practice a slightly different type of law. How do you balance that impact of culture?
Well, ordinarily, just the impact of culture at times defines people's way of life. And the law is there ordinarily to be able to put a balance, between people's way of life and how their way of life affects the other person. So how it affects, women's human rights. So in places where the law has also not grown, to the extent of being able to achieve that, then it becomes very, very, very complex. But it's important for us to find, a balance between the limits of culture and the enjoyment of women's human rights. this happen a lot in highly religious society where they bring religion as culture, and then it becomes like a way of life at the detriment of people like women, children, and other people within the society. So the law should be able to play a role in that regard, and I think that is our hope in terms of how law can set a balance between what the culture says. For example, in some countries there are laws that deal with the issue of inheritance. There are laws that deal with the issue of widowhood. You know, so people will say it's my culture when a man dies, a woman is subjected to widowhood practice. You need to shave her hair and all of that. But the law can say the woman has a right to how she wants her hair to be. You don't have to, wave her hair. So the law can create a balance. And I think that that's what is happening in some places where there has been progressive use of the law. It has helped to develop the society and to stop what ordinarily would have affected that are obnoxious, that would have affected, the dignity of human being.
Doctor, I know that you sit on top of a group of organizations, I would say, that deal with this kind of issues. And there's a comment here in the virtual studio that talks about women must radically speak up. We must preach self-worth, self-esteem, and confidence. And it also talks about women coming together to work together. Are you seeing anything that suggests that the more you get these groups come together, you're actually driving more results for the population at large?
Yeah, yes. One of the things we have realized is that we need to build a women's movement who understands, who also believe in women's rights, who can hold the community accountable, can hold government accountable. We need to work and build alliances across because we have realized that from Nigeria to the US or to the UK or to any part of the world, the problems of women, they are similar. So meaning that we need a global movement, from the global south, from the global north, to come together to demand and continue to hold government accountable. We need to support one another. We need to also support one another, also hold one another's hand, up to be able to address, the problem of women. It's a 30 years journey, and it's not a problem that's going to be solved, so quickly. So we need to depend on one another, to be able to walk down that hall, to address the rights of women across the world.
Doctor, there may be a teenager who may be watching this back in future. There may be that mother whose little girl is suffering. And there may be the man out there that's saying, I don't understand this thing. As a man, where do I go to for help? We talked about this earlier, just interpreting this thing and getting ourselves to understand it. Where do men go for help?
Well, the society is there, oftentimes supportive of men, to work into get and seek help. There are organizations who deal with issues of men and boys, and there are general human rights organizations, national human rights institutions, that deal with issues of men, and women. So my point is that the point you are raising is that within this conversation, there seems to be a lot of emphasis on women and girls, and it does not mean that boys don't suffer rape or that men are not beaten, by their wives. And yes, the emphasis on women at times appears as if those issues are forgotten. But I think that the best approach to it is that we have a holistic way of viewing these issues so that we can address the problems of women and at the same time also address the problems of men. So I believe that that's important, to do. I work on women's human rights, but when a man comes around and has a problem, I also deal with that problem because I know that we need to create a linkage between the two issues, to be able to have a much more longer effect, so I also tell men that I don't hold any man that I speak to at any point in time responsible for the problems of women. I would rather hold the society, that every time socializes every one of us, to the way we behave, to the problem of women. So, and I think with that, it becomes easier to be able to deal with the situation.
Okay.
So
First of
without
all,
blaming anyone.
okay. Thank you for that, Doctor. Before we go to Jide Johnson in the virtual studio audience, I really do want to apologize. I think we're having some uh, bandwidth issues. Rosemary is appearing as frozen. I will get the technical team to look into that, but apologies for that. Jide, can you unmute yourself, please?
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Okay, so my question is, when talking about enacting laws and policies to help promote women empowerment and gender equality in our modern society, I want to ask, are these laws also, is it also going to be applicable to women who probably live in less developed places or in rural areas? Or would a separate set of laws have to be tailored, have to be made tailored to suit their own needs?
Doctor, I'm not sure if you had that question.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Well, the laws and policies would affect everyone. What we canvass for would affect, is supposed to help with equal opportunities, irrespective of who you are or where you are, whether you are in the rural area or you are in the urban area. Yes, we understand the intersectionality, the fact that if you look at violence against women from the point of view of people with disability and other women, you will see that the people with disabilities rather likely going to suffer double jeopardy, than what the the other woman is suffering. So by and large, so the law must be able to have that sensitivity, to be able to cover everyone, in a manner that could lead to equal opportunities in the society. And the law is not for today. Law is supposed to be futuristic. So meaning that the draft of a law must be able to comprehensively address what is happening today and what is happening in future, and is supposed to also address what is happening to one person and also what is happening to each population of people. So I feel that any laws and policy that can guarantee a society that is equal and free from any form of violence must take into cognizance all situation of people affected, whether in rural area or in urban area.
Thank you, Doctor, for that. Um, Let me put this question to you. If you had two or three things that you could kind of wave that magic wand, something that could be implemented quite easily at the policy level, what would those two, three things be?
Well, the first thing that I would push for is to increase budget for women issues, for gender equality issues, rather. So I would ask for gender budgeting, because most of the reason why things are not working is that we don't put our money where our mouth is. There are a lot of statements and commitment towards ensuring women's emancipation, but there's less resources If you look at all over Africa, the lowest ministry or sector that gets funded is the women and children sector. So it's important to increase resources. Globally, even if you look at the international donor agencies and check you map aid effectiveness, you see that gender equality still don't get enough. So we should really be thankful to women organization and activists and all of that kept putting the issue on the front burner. Despite that, there's very poor funding even for it, if you compare it to other issues. Secondly, I would canvass for institutional building. It's important for us to strengthen institutions across, to be able to ensure that we further gender equality. Our institutions are not strong enough. Even the gender machinery are not strong enough in terms of understanding some of these issues. So we need to build institutions that can respond quickly, that can also address, that can help in terms of prevention, that can promote women's human rights, that can address women's rights issue. The third one is that we need to build a movement that is effective, a movement that understands its issue, a movement that can drive, its issue. And that movement will not be built alone by women. It's going to be a global movement that promotes gender equality and demand for gender equality, that is ready to also respond, to address gender equality.
Doctor, I want to thank you so much for your time this evening. This has been such wonderful knowledge just to pass across here. And I know that you're super, super busy, but thank you for taking the time to address these questions. We really appreciate that. Thank you so
It's a
much,
pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Doctor.
And
This is
thank you for the
amazing.
good work you're doing. Thank you for the
Thank you
good
so
work you're
much.
doing.
Thank you so much.
It's a
We
pleasure.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
And once again, to our viewers, I'm so sorry I lost Rosemary there. I can see this. It's a technical fault on our end. Please let me just apologize straight away. I can see something showing up on the system here. So I apologize for that. But you've listened to that, you've seen that, you've heard the words from Rosemary Iyade Usman. You've heard the words from Dr. Abiola Akiyode-Afolabi, an authority on this subject matter. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sure that next week we're going to be back. To our panelists, thank you. To the virtual studio audience, thank you so much for being here again today. The conversations will, of course, continue. And we'll be back here next week with another interesting conversation. And without wasting much time, I'm not sure if we still got, yep. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back, like I said, next week. Hello.